Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organization sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
I'm your host, Brad Jennings, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. Welcome to episode 4 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. I'm so honoured to be talking with Professor Jeff Leiker in this episode. Jeff is a professor at the University of Michigan. He is the author of the international bestseller, The Toyota Way. Jeff has won 13 Shingo Prizes throughout his career and was inducted into the Association of Manufacturing Excellence Hall of Fame in 2012 and the Shingo Academy in 2016. Let's get into the episode. Well, Jeff Leiker, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. It's an amazing journey you've had, 13 Shingo Prizes, many amazing books, best-selling books in their field that have helped so many people. But where did your journey start? What set you on this path down towards enterprise excellence and helping so many people?
Well, if I really go back, not from birth, but to high school, I took a psychology course, and one of the books assigned was called The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. And it was at a point in my senior year where I wasn't real happy with my life and where I was going. And what stood out in the book was that talking about loving as an art, not something that you are in love, but rather you have to learn to love other people. And to do that, you need discipline like any other art, and you need to practice. And that got me very excited, particularly since I was fairly lonely at the time. And he talked about how you can escape loneliness through various escapist activities like drugs and alcohol. And I decided that I wanted to do something in the future that would help other people to develop and learn. But I had decided to go into industrial engineering as an undergraduate. And I read the description of industrial engineering, which was the integration of man-machine material. And it was much about psychology, and organizational behavior is about technical issues. And that excited me because it seemed like something practical where you're trying to help organizations develop the ability to create people who could think and get along together and had bonds to each other. And that excited me, but industrial engineering teaching wasn't like that. It was all the technical tools. So I took courses mostly in sociology as my electives, and that excited me. And the school I was at, Northeastern University, had a cooperative education program. So they would place you in a company to apply what you learned in school, and you go back and forth quarter by quarter, practicing and then learning. And the company I worked for, General Foods, had introduced something called socio-technical systems theory, which was intended to be an integration of the technical and social system, just what I was interested in. And they had done it in 2 dog food plants very successfully. And they're mostly automated facilities, and they needed people to watch control centers and dials and displays and then react to problems. And they found when they organized those people into teams, they gave them a lot of autonomy, they trained them in how to work together as teams, performance improved. So I thought that was great. Then, and I thought that was the answer. Yeah. And when I got a job at University of Michigan in 1982, as an assistant professor of industrial engineering. In between, I got a PhD in sociology. I decided that was more interesting than industrial engineering. Then I went back to industrial engineering, teaching industrial engineering students. And at that point, I got exposed to Japanese manufacturing. And I visited Toyota, among other companies. And I started to feel like there was a missing part of socio-technical systems, that mostly what they're doing at the dog food plant was creating autonomous work groups and trying to motivate people to care about their work and work together with other people, but they were missing the technical part. Wow. So classical industrial engineering was missing the social part, but they had gone over only to the social part of creating teams, and were missing the technical part. But Toyota seemed to be putting it together, where they had a technical system that actually encouraged teamwork, encouraged problem solving. So that really got me hooked on learning from Toyota, leading to the Toyota Way eventually.
So from an early age, you're on this path of blending humanistic elements, social elements, and then the technical systems elements within organizations. Boy, it started to build from a really early age for you. Someone set you on that path.
Well, it certainly seems logical and planned. Looking back, it didn't feel that way at all at the time.
It's an amazing element. Like, it's still today what most organizations are battling with. you're either one of the extremes, aren't you? You're either socially focused and culturally focused, and you lack systems, or you've got the systems and you're lacking the culture piece.
Right. And if you go to a list of consultants, usually they either focus on one or the other.
Yeah. And Jeff, what was it with Toyota that you found? Like when you went into Toyota for the first time and studying it, I know that resulted in your book, The Toyota Way, but what did you find?
Well, people I talked to were espousing a philosophy, and they're talking about wanting to do good for society. That was the goal of the company, and how they needed to develop people to achieve very challenging goals. And they would give me examples of that. And I had heard those sorts of things before. I'd heard that story before. I'd been studying American auto companies when I first came to Michigan. And they also had good stories and good mission statements and sounded good. But then Toyota would show me things, and I would go to the Gemba and I'd see things. And I would see in action what they talked about in the conference room. And that alignment between, and I was living there, and I had to have some faith that what I was seeing was real, but that alignment between the story they were telling and then what they were doing was so powerful. After actually being very disappointed over and over again when I went to companies that were not doing any of the great things they were talking about.
Yeah, there's a disconnect.
There's a disconnect.
What would you say, Jeff? Like I've seen many talks from you, but what would you say is the secret to getting that connect where what the senior leaders are saying or what the organization is talking about is actually getting done within the organization?
I hate to say this is a requirement because it suggests that if you don't do this, you don't have a chance. But certainly what's helped Toyota has been continuity and stability. So it originally started with Sakichi Toyota, who created the first fully automatic loom and was very passionate about achieving his vision through small experiments, working really hard, thinking deeply, and then testing things over and over and over again. Little things until finally he goes from a fully manual wood loom to a fully automated power loom over about a 30-year period. So that persistence, hard work, dedication, commitment to a vision, these are all elements for Sakichi Toyota, which he passed on to his son Kichiro Toyota, who started Toyota Motor Company. And part of the reason that Kichiro Toyota started his own company rather than just continue with the loom works is because of the philosophy of his dad, which was, I contributed something to society. Now it's your turn, Kichiro. I don't want you to just keep doing what I'm doing. I want you to do something new and to make a bigger contribution to society. So Kichiro Toyota started with the loom company, building on his father's philosophy, and then added to that like concepts like just in time. And then eventually people like Taiichi Ohno were brought in. Well, Kichiro Toyota resigned after the company almost went bankrupt and he had to lay off employees, and in shame he resigned. And then the company's taken over, and then eventually Eiji Toyota, his cousin, steps in and is running the company, but building on the philosophies of Sakichi Toyota and Kichiro Toyota. And Eiji Toyota was in a leadership position until the 1970s. So you look over like a 70-year period, and there's continuity of leadership building on what the last person started and adding to it, not replacing. And then it was Eiji Toyota who saw the value in somebody like Taiichi Ohno creating the Toyota production system, gave him the challenge.
Yeah.
But it's just over and over and over again building. And even today, when Akio Toyota, president, is asked, how are you going to approach the new era of mobility, the digital age, autonomous vehicles? And he still says, we're not going to change anything fundamental about our philosophy and approach to leading, but we want to use that and build on that to step into these new technologies and learn about them and then gain trust among our customers that we're a source they can rely on for their mobility needs. So he's very careful even today. And Akio Toyota realizes that the future of mobility is through a lot of new technology that Toyota is not great at and the supply base is not great at. But he doesn't conclude we need to blow up the company and start over, but rather we still need to build on the philosophy and the curious nature of somebody like Sakichi Toyota, who always believed that the next frontier was not something to be afraid of, but something to embrace and to study and to learn about.
And Jeff, with that leadership philosophies and the philosophies of Toyota, what are some of those key leadership behaviors that you'd say set them apart? That is core that they're going to continue with, even into this new era of automation and modernization with technology.
The Toyota Way house that comes out of Toyota, not my book, but out of Toyota, has as a foundation, number one, challenge, which is that you approach any challenge with an open mind, with enthusiasm, and with a belief that you can conquer the challenge if you work hard enough and think hard enough. So that's a starting point for every leader. What is your challenge? And the challenge is not, I want to keep doing what I'm doing and see if I can get a little bit better. The challenge is a big leap forward. And every Toyota leader has a challenge. And through Hoshin Conry, through annual policy deployment, they have a new challenge every year. The second characteristic is go and see, which Toyota calls Genshi Genbutsu, which means understand the actual condition in detail for the specific thing that you're focusing on. What's going on? What's the state of the art? What's going on in your workplace? So there's a very strong belief that you have to deeply grasp the current condition and the reality and study it without bias and understand it, because that's your starting point. So you have the challenge, which is where you want to be, and you have the starting point. Then to get from where you are to the challenge, you need Kaizen. You need continuous improvement. So there's a belief that you rarely can get to the challenge in one big leap through one brilliant insight. And your brilliant insights are likely to be as wrong as they are right.
Yeah.
So there's a humbleness. And you won't know how your ideas are going to work until you test them, until you try them. So you need to find some opportunity, even if it's not a full deployment. It may be a pilot, it may be a simulation, it may be boxes that look like machines, but you try something, and then in trying, that stimulates you to think some more and learn and see the gap between what you expected and what happens. And then you keep doing that over and over again. So Kiichi Toyoda's challenge was to create a fully automatic loom, and he dedicated his whole life to that. But he can't point to any one invention that was the reason for the fully automatic loom. There were thousands, step by step, trial and error. And that became the philosophy of the company, this idea of grappling with an idea and then pressing it up against reality and then learning. So that even includes if I've been doing a lot of teaching and tours of their plant in the United Kingdom, and there's plants here in the United States. And one might think that if there's a Kaizen, an innovation in, say, Kentucky in the United States, that should automatically be implemented everywhere, including in the UK. But they've been taught in the UK that you don't simply copy any idea, even if it's from another Toyota plant. And nobody from headquarters is going to tell you to do much of anything. So they'll set objectives, but they're not going to tell you how to achieve the objectives. So they want, in the UK, they need to think, they need to be exposed that there's something that happened to the Kentucky plant that might be interested, then study it, then think about how it might apply to them, then experiment and test it. And then they might actually come up with an improved version that they teach to the plant in Kentucky. So this is very integral to the culture, that learning culture.
And what's been the major benefits that you've seen, Jeff, of this? So, this process of getting people to set challenges or goals, understand their current state, but then experiment and think and think and think right the way through. What is the benefit in your view of that philosophy?
Well, number one, any company anywhere, any organization anywhere needs to set and achieve goals. If you don't have any goals, then there's nothing really to work on, right? So you have to want to do something and want to accomplish something. So it helps when you clearly define it. If your goal is, I want to tomorrow still be in business and still have some customers and do what I'm doing, but do it a little bit better or respond to problems doing it. Machines go down, I fix the machines. There's a customer complaint, I satisfy that customer's complaint. You rarely really advance very far, and you're going to become obsolete pretty quickly. So you need a bigger challenge than I want to just do what I'm doing and get through the day. So the challenge is really the key to having a goal that will move you forward. And then when you have the challenge, very often people in leadership positions, it could be the executives, the C-suite, they then want immediately to have solutions to meet the challenge. So they're not open to learning. And then once you have a solution, you say, well, I think we could reduce cost by outsourcing. That's great. I heard about that at a conference. Outsourcing is good. Do outsourcing.
It's a quick win.
As a quick win. So what Toyota's been able to do by having this more rigorous process is, number one, they come out with better solutions. Number two, The people who are coming up with the solutions are the people in that part of the business who are responsible for managing that part of the business. So they're there so they can continue to learn and adjust. It's not a one-off. We've outsourced. Now you manage this outsourced vendor for all of our benefit services. And now you're trying to get them to do good things, but you don't have much control.
Yeah.
And you've been told to do it. And you might believe that the company would be better off if you did your own benefits and you could do it cheaper and better. But you don't have that power. So now you've lost that power. Or you've been told deploy lean, and this consulting firm is going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
So you don't have control. You're just trying to please the consultants, but they're doing the thinking, and you may disagree with their approach, but it's not your problem. It's their problem. So you want to create ownership among the stakeholders, the people that control that part of the business. You want them to not only buy in, but also manage the process. And managing the process means developing people in every position who do their jobs well and are thinking of better ways. So the result of that is I think is sustainable competitive advantage.
Yeah.
What are you competing on? Is it cost? Is it quality? Is it delivery? Is it product features? Is it all those things? Whatever the goals are, you can achieve the goals in a sustainable way. And sustainable means you're constantly adapting, improving, and learning and getting better.
That's so insightful, Jeff. Jeff, it leads me to a way you helped me this morning. So I was taking my 4 a.m. morning walk around a park, listening to a talk you'd done at the AME conference in 2016. And I was reflecting on a bad coaching session I had the previous afternoon. I do a lot of coaching in my role, and I was coaching a young salesperson, and I felt totally disconnected. I felt like I got nowhere in the session with them. And as I was walking around, I was listening to you talking about slow and fast thinking and about truly running through plan, do, check, act when you're actually reviewing something with someone or coaching someone. It really helped me. It was one of those aha moments that you often get when you're listening to someone insightful talk. Do you mind explaining that slow and fast thinking?
Just want to ask you, what would you do differently because of that insight?
The part I believe I was doing is the whole session was rushing. So we were missing missing the planning, and also missing staying and learning and checking further. I think I was asking good open questions and having the team member I was coaching actually think, but we were both rushing through the process rather than staying in that check phase and really looking to delve and understand and learn further. We're jumping onto the next thing rather than staying with the learning of a particular topic for enough time.
Right. Well, part of that is an issue of trust, and part of that is an issue of the way you do consulting as a business, which is that in whole days. So the idea that Mike Rother has with Toyota, which is practicing that PDCA process, is that you take something like PDCA that you might do in a day or in a few days or in a Kaizen event for a week, and then stretching it out over time. And he recommends spending about 20 minutes a day on it, which is the maximum time that somebody can take in new information. So if you were to be able to go and visit that place for, say, an hour a day over a long period of time, then you can say, now we're in the plan phase. And then when your client is starting to jump into thinking about solutions, then you can say, okay, we're going to get to that. In fact, let's write that down just so we don't forget. But we're in the plan phase, so we're still trying to define the problem. And we still haven't really understood the current condition. So what Mike did with his model, his kata model, which is start with the challenge, the direction, then understand the current condition, then set your first target condition, which is what do we want to be in 2 weeks? The challenge might be a year out, but it's so far out and it's so big, you can't even imagine how you could possibly accomplish it. But what can we try to accomplish? What could be a goal for 2 weeks from now that will move us in the direction of the challenge? So when you're doing that, you know what stage you're in. Right now, we're in the stage of understanding the current condition. Now we're in the stage of defining a target condition. Right now, we're in the stage of planning one experiment for one idea. Then I'm going to ask you what you expect will happen. Then you're going to run the experiment. Then I'm going to ask you to check what actually happened. Then I'm going to ask you to reflect on what you learned and then to define your next experiment. So you've done is taken a lot of things that happen in parallel and maybe in a somewhat chaotic way, and stringing them out step by step, where you know where you are at any point in time. And the student's role is very clear. The student is the learner. They're responsible for the project. You're the coach. You're coaching them, but it's not your job to get the results. It's not your job to come up with the solutions. That's their job. So it creates a whole different dynamic. Now, if you're coming in and you're expected to give them answers to their problems, and they're jumping ahead and they want to implement, and you're afraid they don't trust you enough to be able to say, let's take a time out. Let's go back to the plan stage. We still haven't really understood the current condition, or I don't think we've done a good enough job of checking to see what we learned from what we just did. Let's take some time to do that. So they have to trust your leadership to agree and say, yeah, let's stop action, even though their inner drive is, let's do some more. I've got a deadline. Let's just keep doing and doing and doing. So it takes trust. It takes some moxie to say stop action. There's a great story that was in the Toyota Way about the chief engineer for the Prius, the first Prius, and the chief engineer Uchiyamada kept getting deadlines pushed forward. He had 2 years, then he had a year and a half, then he had a year, and he thought he was going to develop a gas engine that was very fuel efficient. And then he was told that he needs to develop a hybrid or manipulate it, so he had to develop a hybrid. And the people on the team, on the product development team, were very anxious, and they were just racing to come up with solutions to the best hybrid model and what are the details of that engine. And at some point, he said, stop action. There's a leader who's under incredible pressure to do something nobody had ever done before. And he just said, stop action. He leaves Toyota and takes his team to a hotel. And he said, all we're going to do today is focus on the purpose of this project. Why are we doing this? To get them reoriented and away from getting too much into the weeds of the technical details and remembering why they're doing this and what the purpose is and what they expect to accomplish. So that took a lot of guts and a real strong belief in PDCA or the Toyota Way or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, especially when they're under so much pressure. That's a great case example.
Pressure was amazing. At that point, they thought they were going to make a gas engine, and this is somewhere in the summer, so it was June. And then the vice president of R&D calls him into his office and said, by the way, Uchimata-san, we're going to go to the Tokyo Auto Show, and I promised reporters that we're going to have a hybrid vehicle as a concept vehicle to show them, and so one that they could drive. It has to be working. Now this is July, and this is now in September. They hadn't been working on a hybrid vehicle, and they're supposed to have a working hybrid vehicle.
Wow.
And even in that situation, Uchimata does this timeout and says, let's remember what we're trying to accomplish. Because he didn't want them to rush into picking a specific hybrid technology that they would have to live with for the next 30 years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, he did a great job. We know the outcome of that story, don't we?
Right.
It's a really amazing car that's been so successful. Jeff, you've helped so many people in your career and been a mentor to so many. Who are a few people that were mentors to you and really helped you develop and grow throughout your career? Why were they helpful to you?
Well, there are many at different stages of my life. When I was an undergraduate, it was a sociology professor, Jack Levin, who loved sociology and he loved teaching students and he was excited about all the studies he did, and he loved being an academic. So he inspired me it was actually because of him that I got a PhD in sociology and decided to go into academics. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. And then there are many people at University of Michigan who knew about Japanese management and had been studying it for ages, and they taught me a lot. But at some point I met John Shook, who was at the time working for Toyota, and he had been the American who learned Japanese and was in Japan when Toyota launched NUMI. And he had to do the translation, develop courses for General Motors people who came to Japan to learn the Toyota production system. So he had learned very deeply about the TPS and also about Toyota culture working inside the company in Japan. Then later was involved in startups like the Toyota Technical Center in Ann Arbor, where they develop cars. And his job was to be a liaison to universities. So he became one of my point people into Toyota. And then he decided he wanted to leave Toyota, but he wanted to be not 100% in consulting, but really in academics. And I hired him into the University of Michigan to work with me. And he was a very important mentor. At that time, one of my former students, Mike Rother, also was interested in learning about, like me, was interested in learning about continuous improvement and lean, the Toyota way, and he was much more action-oriented. So I got him a job working in an R&D center where they were working with companies to teach, in his case, continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. And he did all sorts of great things. And he was getting tired of that job, and he wanted to be affiliated with the University of Michigan. So I hired him to work with John Shook and I to create a program at University of Michigan in Lean. And he was my student, who I'm supposed to teach, but he was sort of annoying because he would always come to me with ideas and challenges and problems that I hadn't really thought about. And I would have to address these problems. And he was very stubborn, so he wouldn't do what I asked him to do. He would do what he thought he should be doing. And he'd always take me in different directions. And eventually that led to Toyota Kata, him developing Toyota Kata, unbeknownst to me, over a bunch of years, and then bringing me his book and saying, Jeff, I think you can learn something from this.
It's a great book, isn't it?
A student to teach me. But then he became a mentor because there was so much richness in Toyota Kata and a lot of things I just had never really thought about in that way before. That led to my revising the Toyota Way. I have a second edition coming out in scientific thinking, and a lot of the ideas I've learned from Mike are very central in that new edition.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Jeff. So, Jeff, with someone starting out in their career now, going into leadership or moving down the path of a business improvement type role, what advice would you give them?
Read my book, particularly the new Toyota Way. Read Mike Rother's book, Toyota Kata. John Shook has a book, Managing to Learn, about coaching A3 thinking. And the underlying message of all those books is that lean is not simply a toolkit, but it's a way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And like mastering any complex skill, if you want to be a great athlete or a great musician or a great cook, you need to do the hard work of developing the skills yourself by doing. So as much as you think you're really smart, you were a great student and have degrees from great universities or whatever it is, to really be good at lean, you have to go to the Gemba and learn just like anybody else. And then you need to become a teacher. And your job is not to be the boss who has all the ideas, but to develop a set of students who have the ideas and push you. So you have to learn to be a teacher, which is a different skill set compared to learning to deploy methods and tools. And you have to have the patience and humbleness that you're willing to hand the keys to the car over to the student and let them drive. And that's a different kind of experience because you may think you know the answers already and you watch them struggle. And you can easily get very impatient. So the big, at a high level, the big differences between deploying something and being the subject matter expert and building a culture and very specifically developing certain people as your students who you teach how to understand an operation, how to set goals, how to move in the direction of the goals, and how to build a team, a winning team that is doing the daily work and the daily thinking.
That's very insightful. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for today's episode. And thank you so much for everything you've done over the years. You've inspired me, inspired so many. And I really appreciate your time today.